has left me, so if I go over, I am sorry in advance. I want to all right. I want to start tonight's lesson off with an illustration. I heard a story a long time ago. It starts like this. I believe it'll start a good idea of where we're going with this lesson. Once upon a time, there were two stickmen. Now, they were in a field one day, and they woke up. The two stickmen, though, right off the bat, were at a disagreement. The blue stickman out of the two concluded that since they were made with such precision, that they must have had a maker, as in this case, a carpenter. Yellow, the second stick figure, decided that his perfect shape and form and meticulously painted paint job was just a series of random chances and random events. This led the two stickmen to living very different lives. Blue took care of himself because he figured that the carpenter would come back for them. He wanted to be ready. Yellow, on the other hand, did not live a very careful life. He lived recklessly. He played with fire. He scratched his paint job and began to rot and mold. Yellow, although Yellow was in bad shape, he would always argue with the blue stick figure, saying, "If a carpenter is real, I should be able to see him." But Blue would respond with comments like, "You can see him in yourself." And he would usually follow that up with, "Look at your shape. Look at the paint, the design that's in the paint." Something with that meticulously painted paint job requires great amount of skill. Now, I don't want to go into the story further because I don't want to spoil the end until the end of the lesson, but this obvious nature of this illustration should set the stage for something of the line along the lines of what we were talking about today. I say this because this fictional story sounds very familiar to something that you've probably come in contact with in this world today. These people may say that they need to see God to believe him if he even exists to begin with. Yet he is all around us. We can see him everywhere. He's in the sky. He's in the stars in the sky. We can see him in the trees outside, or even we can find him in his works in the dirt below our feet. Psalms 19, verse 1. We can turn there. We're just going to read that real quick. Psalms 19, verse 1. Psalms 19, verse 1. "The heavens are telling of the glory of God, and their expanses is declaring the work of his hands." The world that is increasingly trying to eliminate God from the question, the Bible, there is no question that this word is the only thing that can show us the plan that God has for our lives. And it's our job to prove to people that don't believe that this is the word. But even if they do not believe, it is obviously the word as I just stated. To do this, God leaves us several reasons to believe in him. He put them in this world to use as evidences. This evening, I want to focus on one of the greatest accounts and tremendous works that God did with his hands. Tonight, I would like to provide a scientific argument for the flood. This account we are referencing to tonight is the Great Deluge. The deluge refers to the flood we read about in Genesis chapter 7. It begins in about verse 10. And in that verse area it says, "And it came to pass every 7 days that the water of the flood came upon the earth." If science can be used to verify this verse that I am attempting to prove tonight, that leaves us with the premise that God exists, and we can be assured that he will come back for us one day. But before we dive into the science behind what I believe could be a scientific argument for it, let's refresh ourselves with the account itself. We're going to read Genesis chapter 7. We're going to start in verse 11. So if you would like to turn there. It starts with, "In the 600th year of Noah's life, and the 2nd month of the 17th day of the month, on the same day all the fountains of the great deep were burst open, and the floodgates of the sky were opened. The rain fell upon the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. On the very same day Noah, Shem, and Ham, and Japheth, the sons of Noah, and Noah's wife, and the 3 wives of their sons with them, entered the ark. They and every beast after its kind, and all the cattle after their kind, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth after its kind, and every bird after its kind, all sorts of birds. So they went into the ark to Noah. By 2, all the flesh entered, male and female, of all flesh entered, as God had commanded him. And the Lord closed it behind him. Then the flood came upon the earth for 40 days, and the water increased and lifted the ark so that it rose above the earth, and the water prevailed, increased greatly upon the earth, and the ark floated on the surface of the water. The water prevailed more and more upon the earth, so all the high mountains everywhere under the heavens were covered, and the water prevailed 15 cubits higher than the mountains and the mountains were covered." I think we need to look at this question first before we get into this lesson. Where did the water come from? There are multiple different possibilities and theories of how God, in his infinite power, could have accomplished this flood. But for the sake of time, we'll only be looking at 2 possibilities. These theories are very different in the sense that they have very different quantities of the water, the sources of the water, on the premise of how the great deluge was to occur. The more common theory, though, would probably be this first one. For theory number 1, this theory is that the world looked a lot similar to the world we have today, in a sense where we had the same continents, the same ocean masses, and the same types of mountains. In terms of water, we had the same water as we have today, but we would still, and now to make the flood happen, an added miracle of more water from the firmament of the fountains of the deep would be required. And in Genesis 7, verse 11, God brought all the waters together on the earth to bring down the firmament and expanses, covering the world, including Mount Everest with its 5+ mile high peak. Then, in chapter 8, 1 through 3, says, "But God remembered Noah and all the beasts and the cattle that were with him in the ark, and God caused the wind to pass over the earth, and the water subsided. Also the fountains of the deep and the floodgates of the sky were closed, and the rain from the sky was restrained, and the water receded steadily from the earth. And at the end of 150 days, the water decreased." This, I believe, is the water obviously turning back into the normal sea levels we have today. Now, I'm not saying that this theory is impossible. I'm not saying God could not do that. After all, God in Genesis 1 created the world that he would flood in Genesis chapter 7 and all the water that was in it to begin with. So I would not put it past him to create a couple bazillion gallons of water to flood the world above Mount Everest. But we're going to look at theory number 2. In this theory, the water we have today was the total amount of water required to flood the world back in Genesis 7. No more water was required than we have today. I'm going to tell you more. I'm going to tell you in more detail the second possibility tonight. I'll try to explain why it's possible without adding water to have and accomplished the deluge with this lesson. First, we need to understand these 2 conditions that require this theory to work. all mountains that were taller than 2 miles, minus the 15 cubits, were formed by plate shifts after Genesis 7:20. I will provide evidence for this claim later in the lesson, but the second condition is that all the water we have today did not stay on the earth before the flood happened. We did not have all the waters we have today before the flood. But after the flood, all the waters that caused it are still here. So, for this comparison, I said the mountains higher than 2 miles could not exist. Well, how high is that? You know the Smoky Mountains here in the United States? Those mountains are 1.25 miles high in elevation. This gives us a very comfortable elevation average to account for large mountains and hills. But we need to make some changes to the earth to account for the flood. We'll just use the earth we have today as a comparison to show you visually what I'm talking about. So, this is what earth looks like today. This is about what earth looks like if you take away the water. You zoom it up a little bit, and you can see all the different elevations. You can see the different mountain ranges, the trenches, and the ocean. Now, to flood the world, we need to get the lowest point of land. We're just going to use a giant excavator to accomplish this. We're going to get the lowest point of land, and we're going to level Earth to that point. And now, once we level Earth to that point, we're going to end up with a ball that looks kind of like this. It might be a little bit more muddy than it is right now, but with that Earth leveled, we're going to have an excess amount of dirt. Now, we're going to get a box, and we're going to put that excess dirt in the box. This excess dirt would probably accumulate up to 60 million cubic miles of dirt. Again, we're just going to put this to the side a little bit. We're going to come back to it. So, now that we got that out of the way, we're going to get a big hose, a big Texas-sized hose, and fill the world up 2 miles high of water. Now, this is earth level to sea, or that says sea level. That's ground level, the lowest point of ground level that we can get, and flooded 2 miles high. This would take about 394 million cubic miles of water. But that is 60 million cubic miles of water more than Earth has today. So what did we do wrong here? We're 60 million cubic miles of water over. Well, remember that box that we set to the side with the 60 million cubic miles of dirt? We're going to get that back in the picture. If I can, there we go. So, we're going to exchange 60 million cubic miles of water with the 60 million cubic miles of dirt. Now, if you can do math better than me, that means we end up with 334 million cubic miles of water to flood the earth 2 miles high. But how flat is this world, and how do we make this work? Because they didn't have a giant excavator to build the ark with. This is what the earth looks like in this analogy right now. This is what earth looks like right now. So, when we put the dirt back into the water, we can't put the dirt back where we excavated it from. Because if we just put Mount Everest back where it was from originally, we're going to end up with the same problem. The mountains are going to come out of the water, and it's not going to work. We're not going to have complete coverage. So, in this theory, it's a theory, the earth looked a lot different before the flood. This is a visual illustration of possibility, what it looked like before the flood. There was not a great amount of elevation. There weren't super high mountains like Mount Everest. This way, when the dirt is put back in, we don't come out, we just spread the water out. This is what the earth looks like leveled. This is what it would look like if we put the dirt back in, not peaked, but spread out along the world. So, with that theory, that leaves us with this very important question. Where did we get the water from in Genesis 7? If we look back at the Genesis 7 account, in verse 11, we're going to read the last half of it. It says, "On the same day, all the fountains of the great burst open." Now, I don't know exactly where these fountains were located. I don't know where they are. I don't know if somebody knows. But with all the forces moving around that day, with all the fountains of the deep opening up, with all the water rushing, the mountains being pushed and all that, I would not be surprised if these fountains of the deep were filled in after the great amount of pressured water came out. Dirt came back in and filled them up. But there's a second part to this verse that says, in verse 11, the last half of the last half, "And the floodgates of the sky were opened." Now, what this floodgate, this was a barrier around the earth, I believe, in this theory, a barrier of water around the earth that looked something like this. This water barrier around the earth could have created a very tropical climate that could support long-lasting life. This could explain growth of tremendous-sized large lizards. But in the part of the verse it said the floodgates were opened. There's no telling exactly how much water this water capsule contained, but we do know that it had enough water to rain 40 days and 40 nights in Genesis 7. So in short, for this theory's premises, all the waters we have today were not on earth to begin with. God had it in reserve in the firmament and in the fountains of the deep. But now, let us consider what this vast amount of water could have caused. This mass of water would weigh over 15 sextillion tons of quickly moving water. This is bound to move a few pieces of dirt. Now, let's just put this into perspective. Have you ever been outside working in your garden and you have your garden hose and you're not thinking very much and you point the garden hose to the ground, you spray it on jet and you get a face full of mud? You know what? Okay, yeah, I haven't done that either. That's silly. Yeah. So, let alone a garden hose, imagine a fire hose. That fire hose can put out 150 gallons of water per minute. Now, that is in total per minute. The fire hose can put out 1.95 to the negative 23rd power in a fraction per minute of water that would have been required to do the flood. Have you ever seen a rainfall hit the ground and create streams of water that push dirt and debris from one area to another? I did. With all this rain that came through, the driveway that was once clean, I know because I cleaned it myself, is now covered with mud in one spot, half an inch thick. There's half inch of mud on our driveway after the rain had moved it from one place to another. Now, a flood storm like the deluge that could put out 15 sextillion plus tons of water could carve mountains, not only mountains, but canyons themselves in truly short order. Now, the next question that we need to ask, what would this do to the sediment in the floodwaters of the deluge? In Genesis 7:18 through 19, if you have a global flood moving around the entire globe and moving sediment all around it, there is bound to be similar layers across the world, right? That is true. Several sediment layers are found around the world and appear to be similar. Whether it took several million years, as the evolutionist timeline would say, or if it happened within just a few short months, they are evident. One of the similar layers being the, I'm going to mispronounce this, Paleozoic layer. According to Britannica, Paleozoic rocks are widely distributed on all continents. Most are in sedimentary origin and may show evidence of disposition in or near shallow oceans. Does this not sound familiar to what we are talking about? Sure does, right? Oceans, flood. Now, that's one layer. Second layer being the Mesozoic layer. Now, quick side note before I reference this article, they even mention worldwide flooding to account for the findings they find in these layers. Now, in the Britannica article titled The Mesozoic Era, these layers are found in North, South America, and even Paris, indicating that these layers had a similar, if not the same event laying them down. Maybe something like a global flood. These terms that you see up here are evolutionist terms relating to similar formations that could have formed over millions of years. But for creationist scientists, these layers mean very quick and rapid layers being laid down one upon another very quickly in a global flood. So here's another question we must ask regarding these sedimentary layers. These layers that we find, do we find animals in them in a struggling position, since technically they were being killed by drowning? Well, they do have them. These are dinosaurs, as you probably tell with the skeleton, in a drowning position or in a position that they are suffering. Now, if you see, they are mostly intact. This means that they probably were not fighting for their life from something bigger than them, trying to stay in one piece and not getting eaten and carried in different places, which to me means that they were buried very quickly in fast-moving water, and they were drowning. They were in a very bad position. So, now, how does having a global flood that buried everything end up with different but similar sediment layers all over the world? Let me just say that again, but in a little illustration. Have you ever had popcorn with M&Ms? Now, if you're like me, you eat the M&Ms too quick, this doesn't apply to you. But if you have popcorn and M&Ms in a container and you shake it, what's going to happen? Yeah, the M&Ms are denser than the popcorn. So the M&Ms are going to work their way down, and the popcorn is going to basically work itself up. The same idea can be applied to the layers of sediment we have on the earth. If you have two different animals with two different densities or surface areas, they will be found to be in different sedimentary layers based off of density or surface area. Now, but here is the real puzzling piece. I'm sorry, one second. These layers, even though they are separated, what we are told to believe by millions of years, I believe these could have been laid down within a matter of minutes or even hours of each other. But here is a real puzzle piece that we need to look at. Here we go. Mount St. Helens. This is very important. Mount St. Helens had some pretty interesting stuff happen to it. In May 18th, 1980, Mount St. Helens erupted. You can see the before and after picture, before being the left, after being the right. Mount St. Helens erupted and caused catastrophic damage to the area. In the area, we can now observe Spirit Lake. Spirit Lake was the place where all the trees from the mountain came rushing into. This lake was completely covered with logs from the mountain. Now, these logs sitting in water, after a few weeks, started to swell. Now, we're going to use this log here. You can see in the left corner of the screen as the example. What would happen is the log would be sitting like this with the root end on this side. After a little bit, it would start to swell, and the heavy roots would pull it vertical. And after a little bit more time, it would get even heavier and gradually sink to the bottom, standing straight up and down on the bottom of the seafloor. Now, when they settle, the dirt settles with them. And we can find something that looks like this in the dirt. That is a tree going through supposedly millions of years of rock. We call these polystrate fossils. They can be found all over the world. There's one, it's an older picture, but it's a tree going through many layers, and there's 3 more. There are plenty of examples, but there's just a couple pictures there to get your idea. There's trees going through all those different layers. You can see where the layers stop, start, and they're going through many, many of these layers. So, the only thing that polystrates suggest is that these trees around the world were involved in a flood that's made them very swollen, sunk, and were buried with sediment. Now, but what do we need to answer the question, where did the water go? We know what the water did now. Where did the water go exactly? Genesis 8 verse 3, when the winds went over the earth and the water started to subside. Let's turn your Bibles to Psalms 104, verse 6, and we'll read from there. So, Psalms chapter 104, verse 6. It reads, "You covered it with the deep as with the garment, and the waters were standing above the mountain. At your rebuke they fled. At the sound of your thunder they turned away. The mountains rose, the valleys they sank." This gives us the answer just in a poetic form. What could this mean when it says the mountains rose and the valleys sank down? Well, let me suggest to you that these movements of the valleys and mountains were caused by plate shifting after the flood's purpose was accomplished. Now, to understand, sorry, one second. This is when mountains the size of Mount Everest, in this theory, would have been formed. When you have two plates colliding, especially if God is separating them fast enough to subside the waters, you would have two plates coming together head on. Now, they can't mold together and just become one. They're very stubborn. So what happens, in some cases, when you have two plates colliding, you have one coming in, another one coming in, and one might be slightly higher than the other. You have them hit, the one that's slightly lower shoots down, and the other one comes up. That is how I believe, in this theory, the mountains could have been formed that were 5+ miles high. Now again, this lesson, this is theory, not fact. No one here or anyone in the world now or in the future will ever know what happened in the flood of Noah's day. That is until we ask when we get to heaven ourselves. Although the resources to find this information is readily available to see these proofs, we don't know for sure. But people in the Brotherhood, like Apologetics Press, World Video Bible School, and Focus Press, all have great sources that I use myself to present this lesson to you this afternoon. And I recommend you go look at them yourself, because honestly, this is just the tip of the iceberg, and there are many icebergs. So I recommend you do this research on your own. But all that to say, we can find God in that. We can find God anywhere. But now I'll tell you the rest of the story with the two stickmen from earlier. While the blue was still giving his yellow companion a rebuttal, the carpenter himself came up and picked them up and carried him back to his house. Now, Blue was ready for this. In fact, Blue was hoping the carpenter would come back soon. But Yellow was not ready at all. He was in really bad shape, burnt, scratched, and rotting everywhere. As the carpenter was looking over the two figures, he decided that he could fix what little damage Blue had sustained during his time in the field and spend time with him forever, where he would stay with Blue, him and the figure forever. But Yellow was so damaged that they could no longer be together forever, because the carpenter believed that Yellow was so damaged beyond fixing, it just wasn't plausible. So he decided the only good use for this yellow stick figure was to be fuel for the furnace to keep him and the blue figure warm. That furnace was very hot. It was filled with fiery flames. Now, the obvious, I guess you could say, nature of this illustration, you probably know exactly what this story is trying to portray. But if we want to do it faster, the whole story could be summed up in just one verse of the Bible. It's in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, 1 through 3. Now, as the period and times, brothers and sisters, you have no need of anything to be written to you, for you yourselves know full well that the day of the Lord is coming, just like a thief in the night. Well, they are saying, peace and safety, and suddenly destruction will come upon them like labor pains upon a pregnant woman. They will not escape. Do not be like the yellow stickman. Look at the world around you. God is everywhere. You can find God in anything He has created and see it with the perfect design. The most important part is that God Himself, He is not in the dirt, at least anymore. We know that He raised on the third day. He is in heaven waiting for us. But God might come here before we go there. And we need to be ready if that happens. Because when that happens, there will be no second chance. So, will you come, make your needs known? If there's anything we can do for you, will you come as we stand and as we sing?